The night was dark, the streets nearly empty, and the flashing red and blue lights cut through the silence like a blade. A police cruiser sat still, its high beams illuminating the sleek black luxury car pulled over at the side of the road. The officer inside the cruiser gripped the steering wheel tightly, watching the driver's silhouette through the windshield. Something about the car felt out of place. It wasn't stolen, he had already run the plates, but in this particular neighborhood, at this particular hour, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. With a sigh, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a black male, late 30s, driving an expensive vehicle in the neighborhood. No violations, but I'm gonna run a stop and check." "Over." "Copy that. Proceed with caution." He stepped out of the car, hand resting on his holster, and approached the driver's side. His boots scraped against the pavement, each step calculated, controlled. The window was already rolling down before he even knocked. Inside, the driver sat calm and composed, dressed in a crisp suit, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. His watch gleamed under the glow of the streetlights, a brand the officer couldn't even afford on his salary. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his voice sharp, clipped. The man said nothing. He simply reached into the glove compartment, pulled out his wallet, and handed over the documents without a word. The officer snatched them, flipping open the license. The name on the card made his breath catch in his throat. His fingers clenched around the leather of his belt. The driver tilted his head slightly, watching him with an unreadable expression. Then, he finally spoke, his voice smooth, controlled. "Are you sure you want to do this?" For the first time, the officer felt something he hadn't expected. Doubt. His grip on the license tightened. He knew that name. He had heard it whispered in the precinct, in hushed conversations, in warning tones. He had read it in reports, seen it on internal memos. This was the last person he ever wanted to pull over. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The driver leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto the officer's. There was no fear. No submission. Just patience. "Call your captain," the man said softly. The officer stiffened. "Excuse me?" "Call your captain. Right now." There was no threat in his voice, but something about the way he said it made the officer's stomach turn. He felt his pulse in his temples, a slow, suffocating pressure creeping up his neck. He took a step back, swallowing hard. He knew he should just end this, hand back the license, say there was a mistake, and let the man go. But pride was a dangerous thing. Instead of calling his captain, he pressed his radio. "Backup requested at my location. Possible non-compliant suspect." "Over." The driver sighed. A long, disappointed sigh. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into the pocket of his suit jacket. The officer's hand flew to his holster. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked. The driver didn't even flinch. He pulled out a slim, black business card and flicked it towards the officer. "Read it." Hesitant, the officer picked it up, flipping it over in the dim streetlight. His stomach dropped as he read the words. Internal Affairs Division, Special Investigator. His entire body turned to ice. The driver leaned back in his seat, watching as the realization sank in. "You really should have called your captain." Before the officer could respond, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. Backup had arrived. But the moment they saw who was sitting in the car, their faces turned pale. The officer felt his world shift beneath him. He had just made the biggest mistake of his career. And there was no turning back. The moment the backup officers stepped out of their cars, their expressions shifted from alert readiness to something closer to panic. One of them, a seasoned sergeant with years on the force, took one glance at the driver and his entire stance changed. His hand, which had been resting near his holster, immediately moved away. He turned to the first officer, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" The officer swallowed hard. His mind was racing, his pulse hammering. He refused to comply. "Shut up." The sergeant grabbed his arm, squeezing hard. "You don't speak. You don't move. You don't breathe until I tell you to." The officer flinched. He had never seen his superior like this before. Shaken. Afraid. The driver, still seated inside his car, let the moment drag out. His gaze flicked between them, calm, controlled, as if he had seen this reaction 100 times before. Finally, he spoke. "I asked him to call his captain. He refused." The sergeant's face tightened. He turned, grabbed his radio, and within seconds, his voice was ringing out in a shaky command. "Dispatch, I need the captain at my location. Immediately." A long, tense silence followed. The radio crackled. "Copy. Captain is en route. ETA 5 minutes." The sergeant turned back to the driver. "Sir, I..." The driver raised a hand, cutting him off. "I'll wait for the captain. In the meantime." He glanced at the first officer, who was still standing frozen beside his patrol car. "What's your name, officer?" His stomach dropped. He hesitated. The sergeant nudged him sharply. "Answer him." His throat was dry. Sweat gathered at his temples. He forced out his name, barely above a whisper. The driver nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. Then, he reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out his phone. The officer's chest tightened as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just an internal affairs officer. This man had power. And now, he had evidence. The video he had been recording was still rolling. Every word. Every action. Every single second of the stop. Captured. The officer's legs felt weak. He knew what came next. The viral videos. The media outrage. The hearings. The investigations. His career was hanging by a thread, and the man in the car? He was about to cut it. The distant hum of an approaching car made them all turn. The captain had arrived. And with him? The officer's last chance to survive this. The captain's car slowed to a stop, and before the wheels had even come to a full halt, he was already stepping out, his face tight with urgency. He scanned the scene quickly, his officer standing stiffly beside the patrol car, his sergeant looking pale, and then him. The man in the suit. The captain's breath hitched. He knew that face. Everyone in the department did. And the moment he saw the phone recording, his stomach sank. "Oh, no." He muttered under his breath. He straightened his uniform, trying to compose himself. "Sir," he started carefully, addressing the driver with a forced calmness. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding." The man didn't flinch. "Is that so?" His voice was smooth, steady, and laced with something unreadable. The captain hesitated. This wasn't just an officer making a mistake, this was a ticking time bomb. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to hear exactly what happened." The driver slowly turned his phone around, letting the captain see the screen. The recording played back crystal clear. The officer's aggressive tone. The unjustified stop. The refusal to call a superior. The hand twitching near the holster. The captain's face went white. The sergeant didn't even look up. And the officer? His heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Sir," the captain started again, his voice weaker this time, "I can assure you. I know exactly what you're about to say," the man cut him off. "That this was all a misunderstanding. That your officer didn't mean anything by it. That I looked suspicious driving my own car in my own city. The captain swallowed hard. The sergeant looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. And the officer? He was barely breathing. But here's where you all went wrong, the driver continued, leaning back against the headrest. You assumed I was just another black man who wouldn't fight back. The air grew heavy. The driver took out a second phone, one none of them had noticed before. And you assumed that I wasn't already investigating you. The officer's stomach dropped. Investigating. The captain's voice barely came out. The man smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that came before a storm. I've been monitoring racial profiling complaints in this department for months. The captain's face twitched. Your department is under federal review. The officer's knees felt weak. He had heard rumors about this. Whispers in the locker room. Internal Affairs had been looking into corrupt cops, but nobody knew how close they had gotten. And now? The man they had just tried to intimidate? He was leading the investigation. The captain opened his mouth, but no words came out. The officer stood there, frozen, feeling the weight of his actions crushing him. This wasn't just a bad stop. This wasn't just a routine patrol gone wrong. This was the beginning of the end. The man in the car let the silence stretch. Then, with a slow exhale, he finally spoke. You should have listened when I asked you to call your captain. And with that, he ended the recording. The officer felt his entire career slip through his fingers. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on the officer's chest. His mind spun, trying to grasp what was happening, but the reality was sinking in fast and hard. This wasn't just a bad stop. This wasn't just an angry civilian. This was a trap he had walked straight into, and it had snapped shut. The captain's face was still pale, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. The sergeant wouldn't even meet his eyes. But it was the driver, the man sitting so calmly in his car, who sent a new wave of fear coursing through his veins. Because he was too calm. Too collected. Too prepared. That meant one thing. This wasn't just an investigation. This was a takedown. The driver tucked his phones back into his suit pocket and gave the captain a measured look. So, what happens next? He asked, his voice calm as ever. The captain took a sharp breath, then turned to the officer. Hand over your badge and gun. The officer's stomach dropped. What? His voice cracked, but the captain's face was stone cold. I said, hand over your badge and gun. Now. His breath came short and shallow. This is ridiculous, he shouted, his voice rising. I was just doing my job. He looked suspicious. Stop talking. The captain's voice cut through his like a blade. The officer clenched his fists. He could feel every set of eyes on him. The backup officers. The sergeant. The driver, who still hadn't stopped watching. And worst of all, the body cams. They were recording everything. Every excuse. Every plea. Every desperate attempt to justify what couldn't be justified. He reached slowly for his holster, unbuckling it with stiff fingers. His gun felt like lead as he pulled it free and placed it in the captain's outstretched hand. Then came his badge. The symbol of his authority. The thing that had once made him feel powerful. Untouchable. Now, it was nothing more than a piece of metal. And in this moment, it felt like a prison sentence. You're on immediate suspension, the captain said firmly. Pending an internal review. The words hit like a hammer. He tried to speak, to argue, but the captain had already turned away. Instead, he found himself looking at the driver. And what he saw there wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment. As if he wasn't even worth being angry at. The driver pulled his car door closed. "You did this to yourself." And with that, he drove away, leaving the officer standing alone in the wreckage of his own career. The officer stood there, frozen, his fingers twitching as the weight of his suspension sank in. The flashing lights of the patrol cars painted the street in a surreal red and blue haze, but everything around him felt distant, as if he were trapped in a slow-motion nightmare. The backup officers avoided his gaze. The sergeant remained silent, jaw clenched. And the captain? He was already on his phone, speaking in hushed but urgent tones, probably reporting the incident to higher-ups. "This isn't over," the officer muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure if he was talking to himself, or if he wanted someone, anyone, to believe him. But no one responded. The wind whistled through the empty street. And then, his phone buzzed. He hesitated before pulling it from his pocket. The screen flashed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it. But something in his gut told him to answer. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello?" A deep, measured voice came through the speaker. "You really messed up tonight." His blood ran cold. "Who is this?" A brief pause. Then, "Someone who's been watching." The officer stiffened. His pulse thundered in his ears. Whoever this was, they knew something. And they weren't on his side. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. A low chuckle came from the other end of the line. "Sure you do. And so do they." The call ended. His hand tightened around the phone. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was the one being hunted. Hours later, police department headquarters. The officer sat in a dimly lit interrogation room, staring at the one-way mirror. He could feel eyes on him. Watching. Studying. The door creaked open, and the captain walked in. His face was tired, his shoulders tense. "You're in deep," he said bluntly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. The officer swallowed hard. "You've been suspended, but I need to know if you want to go down alone, or if you want to start talking." A lump formed in his throat. Talking about what? The captain's gaze darkened. "Come on, don't play dumb. You think this is about one bad stop? This is bigger than you." The officer's chest tightened. The captain leaned forward. "Internal Affairs has been digging for months. They're coming for the whole department, and you just gave them exactly what they needed to move faster. The question is, are you gonna go down alone, or are you gonna tell them what you know?" The officer's breath hitched. He hadn't wanted to see it before. But now, it was unavoidable. He wasn't just a target. He was a pawn in something much bigger. And if he didn't make the right move, he was about to be wiped off the board. The officer leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. The dull buzz of the overhead fluorescent light felt too loud, the air too thick. The captain's words echoed in his head. "Are you gonna go down alone, or are you gonna tell them what you know?" 1,000 thoughts crashed through his mind. This was supposed to be just another night. A routine stop. A small thing. But now? Now, he was facing the end of everything. He had worked his whole life for this job. He had believed in the power of the badge, the authority it gave him, the respect it commanded. But for the first time, he saw the cracks. And now, they were widening beneath his feet. His hands clenched into tight fists. "I didn't do anything wrong," he muttered, but the words felt empty even to him. The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "You still don't get it, do you?" His voice was tired, exasperated. "This isn't just about what happened tonight. That stop was the final piece of a puzzle that's been building for months." The officer frowned. "What puzzle?" The captain gave him a long, measured look. Then, slowly, he slid a folder across the table. The officer hesitated before flipping it open. And then, his stomach dropped. Inside were case files. Complaints. Reports. Statements. Names he recognized, civilians who had accused him of racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation tactics. He felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just one mistake. This was a pattern. You think tonight was bad, the captain continued, his voice low and sharp. This is what internal affairs already had on you. And tonight? Tonight just proved they were right. The officer felt a cold sweat on his back. He flipped through the pages. Some of the accusations were from years ago. Ones he had dismissed. Ones he had been protected from. He had always assumed the department had his back. But now? Now, they were cutting him loose. His breathing came short and uneven. They can't do this, he whispered. They can't just throw me away like this. The captain leaned in, his expression grim. They're not throwing you away. They're making an example out of you. Silence stretched between them. The officer swallowed hard. So, what now? The captain sat back, his jaw tight. That depends on you. You can fight this, pretend you did nothing wrong, but that means you'll take the full hit when they bring charges. A slow pause. Or, you start talking. The officer's heart pounded. Talking about what? The captain's eyes darkened. We both know this department isn't clean. We both know you've seen things, heard things, that shouldn't have happened. This is your last chance to save yourself. The officer's hands trembled as he stared at the folder in front of him. His entire life had been about control. About power. But now? He had never felt weaker. The walls were closing in. And the only way out? Was to betray the very system he once swore to protect. The officer sat in silence, staring at the folder in front of him. His hands trembled, his breath came in shallow bursts. He had spent years enforcing the law, wearing the badge with pride, believing in the power of his authority. But now? Now, the very system he had devoted his life to had turned against him. The captain watched him closely, his fingers drumming against the table. You don't have much time, he said. If you want to save yourself, you need to start talking. The officer's jaw clenched. You want me to snitch on my own department? The captain didn't even blink. I want you to tell the truth. The words hung in the air. For the first time, the officer realized how alone he was. The men he had once called brothers weren't coming to save him. The department wasn't going to cover for him. He was disposable. His whole career, he had thought he was untouchable. Now, he was just a liability. His fingers curled into fists. If I talk, they'll come after me. The captain exhaled, rubbing his temples. You think they're not coming for you already? IA has everything they need to bury you. If you help them, you might walk away with something. If you stay silent, you'll lose everything. A sharp pain settled in the officer's chest. This wasn't just about one bad stop. This was the entire system coming down. And now, he had a choice. Go down alone. Or take everyone else with him. He licked his lips, his throat dry. What do you want to know? The captain leaned forward, eyes dark with something unreadable. Everything. 48 hours later, Internal Affairs Headquarters. The officer sat in a different interrogation room now. This one was colder, quieter. A small recording device sat on the table, a red light blinking steadily. Across from him, the same man he had pulled over 2 nights ago, the undercover investigator from Internal Affairs, sat calmly, watching him with an expression of careful patience. The officer felt sick. How had it come to this? "State your name for the record," the investigator said. The officer swallowed hard, then did as he was told. A pause. "You understand that your testimony will be used in the ongoing federal investigation against corruption within your department?" He hesitated. The room felt too small. His uniform, the same uniform he had once worn with pride, felt too heavy. But deep down, he knew. There was no other way out. "Yes," he whispered. The investigator pressed play on the recorder. "Then start from the beginning." And just like that, the betrayal began. The recorder blinked red, capturing every word. The officer sat in the sterile interrogation room, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his own words. For years, he had believed in the power of his badge, that it granted him authority, control, protection. But now? It felt like a chain around his neck. The internal affairs investigator sat across from him, silent and still, letting the weight of the moment settle. The officer had spent the last 2 hours confessing. He had named names. He had exposed the system. And with every sentence, he felt himself sinking deeper. "I did what I was told," he said, his voice hoarse. "They told us how to act, who to watch. It wasn't just me. It was the system." The investigator raised an eyebrow. "So, that's your excuse?" The officer flinched. "An excuse. That's all it was, wasn't it?" For years, he had justified every unjust traffic stop, every aggressive search, every moment of looking the other way because that was just how things were done. But now? Now, he saw what he had refused to admit all along. The badge had never protected him. It had used him. He had been nothing more than a pawn in a broken system, and now, that system was about to swallow him whole. "I thought we were the good guys," he muttered. The investigator leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Being the good guy isn't about wearing a uniform." Silence stretched between them. The officer let out a shaky breath. "What happens now?" The investigator studied him for a long moment. "You'll testify." The officer's stomach twisted. "And after that?" A pause. "You'll face consequences." "But how severe?" "That depends on how much you're willing to cooperate." The words hit hard. He had spent his entire life feeling untouchable. Now, he was at the mercy of the very system he had abused. His hands tightened into fists. For the first time in his life, he had to face the truth. Justice wasn't about who had the power. It was about what you did with it. And he had made the wrong choices. 6 months later, the courtroom. The officer sat in a stiff suit, his hands resting on his lap as he waited for his name to be called. The courtroom was packed, reporters lining the back, cameras rolling. He had seen dozens of trials like this before. But never from this seat. Never as the one being judged. His lawyer leaned in. "You tell the truth, you might walk out of here with something left." He swallowed hard, nodding. Then, the bailiff called his name. He stood, walking toward the witness stand. And for the first time in his life, he finally understood what justice really meant.